Okay, good evening, everybody. We are here with Greg Rossman. He is running for Broward County State Attorney as a Republican. Good evening, Greg Rossman. How are you doing, sir?
Rossman.
Rossman,
Yes,
I'm
sir.
sorry, Rossman.
That's okay. I've been called worse, so okay.
Rossman, okay.
I'm doing very well. How are you?
I'm doing well, sir. Thank you very much, and thank you for taking the time out of your busy schedule to stop by the Adams Brothers podcast and speak with us. And
I appreciate the
want to ask
invitation.
you a few questions and just try to give the public, a little bit of, who you are and why they should vote for you.
Yes, sir.
Okay, so first off, well, we will just go on, just introduce yourself and tell us about you and tell us about your education, where you grew up, and what makes you want to run for Broward County State Attorney.
Well, I am actually born and raised here. I was actually born down in Miami. I'm a second generation Miami. My father was born in Miami in 1936, and I was born in 1965, and grew up my entire life in an area at the time was called Scott Lake. It's now part of Miami Gardens. It was unincorporated Dade County, so it was not part of any city. I grew up right across the street from Scott Lake Elementary School. And then when I was 14, we moved almost to County Line Road, still in Dade County, but an area called Andover. We could see where Joe Robbie Stadium is now when I was growing up, my teenage years. So I'm essentially a born and raised South Floridian. I went to high school at Catholic high school called Chaminade High School. Now it's called Chaminade Madonna High School. Then I went to Broward Community College for about 3 years to get my 2-year degree as I was working my way through college. And I wouldn't have done it any other way. No, my father was the first person in his family ever to go to college. So it was important to him that we all have goals beyond just high school. I'm the youngest of 5 boys, youngest of 5 brothers. My oldest brother, it's funny because he is really did not ultimately take to college, but started his own company. And now he could buy and sell his brothers. So he did very, very well for himself. But I guess it came from the work ethic that we were taught as growing up in a household. You grew up every Saturday morning, you were not allowed to go out to play until you did your chores first. That was not unique to my family. I mean, I think it was really kind of more ingrained in the time and the era I grew up, but I'm glad that I was raised with that work ethic. So all along, I was expected to work. My first job, in fact, I was 14 years old. And I tell people it's a job I didn't ask for, I didn't interview for, and I didn't want. But my next oldest brother was turning 16, and he was a dishwasher at an Italian restaurant. And the owner told him he could be a delivery driver, provided he could find somebody to take his job as a dishwasher. So my brother came home that night and said, "Tomorrow you're going to work with me, and you're a dishwasher." And I said, "Well, I didn't even apply." So, but it was great. You know, it taught me the value of money. It taught me the value of hard work. So when I graduated high school, for me to go to college, I had to pay my own way. And rather than just try to borrow whatever I could borrow, and certainly nowadays, even then, they would give you money, whatever you asked for, just thought it was better to kind of pay my own way as I went. So I worked 2 and 3 jobs at the same time. And it took me 2.5 years to get my 2-year degree from Broward College here, both going to the Central Campus and the South Campus, coming from North Dade County. And after that, I went up to Florida State University, Tallahassee, and did 2 years there, finished my 4-year degree, came back to South Florida because my wife, who we were not married yet, but we were ready together since right after high school, decided that if it was up to me, we'd have stayed in Tallahassee. I loved it up there. But I had proposed we were going to get married, and she said, "Our entire family's in South Florida, so we're going to go back to where our family is." So I could stay in Tallahassee or get married. So we came back to South Florida. And 31 years later, we're still married. Got married in June of 1989.
Congratulations.
Thank you. Something I'm very, very proud of. So she's as tolerating me right now as we speak. So I worked for about 3 years after undergrad. I had always thought I wanted to go to law school. I should say this, from the time I was 5, 6 years old, I was told that I was either going to be a preacher or an attorney, because I guess I was born with the gift of the gab, for whatever that was worth. And ultimately, when I graduated undergrad school, when I graduated FSU, I had applied to law school, but I wasn't sure. Honestly, I wasn't sure that I was going to law school because I wanted to go or because it was what people had steered me towards. And you can't do anything because other people want you to do it. You have to, you have to have the drive yourself, whether that is starting your own company, becoming a lawyer, or anything in life. So I took a year off, which that's when we got married, moved back to South Florida. That turned into 3 years. And I went to Nova Southeastern right here locally. That did require borrowing money. I worked all the way through, but it required borrowing some money. But it was worthwhile. It was investment in our future. And the goal was only to be a prosecutor, to be quite honest with you. I did not really see I don't want to say I didn't see the value in the legal work. I didn't actually. I was naive. Now that I have left, and I was a prosecutor for 20 years, so kind of looking backwards, I've been able to do great work in my private firm, and stuff I'm very, very proud of. I did not see that as a young man. I thought going to law school, the only thing for me, it wasn't about financial and making money and things like that. It was about serving my community. I grew up in a service community. My father graduated from high school and enlisted in the Army the day he graduated from high school. He was in the Army for 4 years. Came back he was actually in West Point his last 2 years. They sent him to West Point and he did not re-enlist because he didn't want to be in the military the rest of his life. So he moved back here to Miami and became a police officer and served from 1958 to 1988. And then became a chief of police up in an area called Palm Bay, 2 hours up I-95 from here, for 6 years. And since then, thank God, he has just been a grandfather, retired grandfather, and still with us, thank God, 83 years old. So if he ever watches this, Dad, I'm give mom a shout out. She's 80 as well.
God bless them.
Yes, he has, and they gave us a great example of not just a work ethic, but they were both involved. They really both had two jobs. My father as a police officer, and he would go to school at night to finish his college degree, which he ultimately finished to get his master's, so he could then teach later at night, so have a
Ooh.
working all the time. But she ran the house. She ruled the house. Even our dog was male. I tell people, but she ruled the house and raised us straight and narrow. And we learned respect for those above us, but respect also for those around you, respect for your community. And you were expected in our family in some way, shape, or form to serve your community. Now, whether that was taking a job like in public service, like a prosecutor, or if you have a private business, you still have an obligation to serve your community. You have to figure out what that best way is, how you can serve your community. It's not just writing a check. Obviously money helps in many ways, but writing a check to me doesn't really provide service. Going and being involved with Habitat for Humanity. I got involved we built a couple of homes. In fact, when I was in the state attorney's office, we went and brought a team of prosecutors out and worked on a couple of homes for Habitat for Humanity, which is a great organization because not only they bring volunteers, but the people they're helping, they make them have sweat equity, and then they've got, they get the dignity and the pride of helping build their own home and have something of their own. So I was raised in a home where you were expected to serve your community, whether it was through your church, whether it was through your job, whether it was through both. And so when I decided to go to law school, it was with one goal, to become an assistant state attorney, or the prosecutor as most people refer to it. And being here since high school, Broward essentially has been my home. So my goal was to serve here. I interviewed for one job. I applied for one job when I graduated from law school. And thankfully I was, through grace, I was hired. And October 3rd of 1994, I started. And I served 20 years, figured I would serve 30, 35 years, do my work, hopefully honestly, and then anonymously leave that job and then retire and continue to serve my community. It became more difficult in the 20 years that I was there. And this is not, it's not a personal attack on Mike Satz, who was the state attorney, who gave me the opportunity, took a chance on some young kid he did not know. But I've been telling people I don't know of a thriving, successful organization, whether it's a private company or even a governmental agency, that has the same CEO it had in 1976. Those organizations don't exist because every organization needs change. It needs reinvigoration. It needs some kind of new thought. And when I was there, I always thought it was my obligation every day to come to work, not just to go to court and win my cases. My job was to how do I make the office better? How do I make my witness coordinator job easier? How do I make my secretary's job better? Not just easier, but better. How do I make her day better? How do the clerk of courts, when I would go to court, and I'd encourage you, call any clerk of court that encountered me in court. Treat them with respect as a human being. Ask how their day is. They're married to have children? How are they doing? How was their weekend? Those were things that mattered to me. Curtis, one of the janitorial staff, or you want to say the cleaning staff there, still works in the courthouse. When I walk in the courthouse, to this day, I walk in and he sees me down the hallway. He says, Greg, how are you? And by the way, if Curtis is watching, you have to be either a Heat fan or a Laker fan. You can't be both. Curtis he has two favorite teams, and I call that being a front runner, by the way. But I mean, those things that mattered to me as much as the work I was doing in court. That doesn't mean the work I was doing in court wasn't very important, as you all well know. I mean, I took that very much to heart. That meant everything to me. The mission, I still miss the mission. And that's one of the reasons why I want to go back. I did not leave because I couldn't do the work anymore. I left because I couldn't do the work anymore in the office that I was in. It didn't, you know, when I would take up the cause of my witness coordinator and say, hey, I don't think he makes enough money. He's been working here 33 years and he can't survive. I was told, go to court and win your cases and leave that. That's not your job. Stay out of it. When my secretary has added a third lawyer to take care of, so now she's doing extra work, 1/3 more work than everybody else, and doesn't get a dime raise, she has no voice. We're not union. There's nothing else out there. I go to the top of the hill and I say, you need to take care of her. She needs to be compensated in some way. And by the way, the reason she got that extra work is because she could do it. She was very good at what she did. She cared. She stayed and did the work when it had to be done. And I was told, well, we know what you think of your secretary. We know you think very highly of her, but go to court and win your cases and stay out of it. And it just, that kind of, those are just two examples. There were 100 examples like that. That, I don't know how else to say it, but just, and I don't mean to be dramatic about it, but it just saps your soul. I'm a person that wakes up very natural. I'm blessed. I wake up happy, thankful for what I have, as opposed to what I don't have. And I tell people, wake up happy until something makes you sad. Why wake up sad, expecting something to make you happy? You'll go your whole life and you'll never meet that expectation. So it got to the point where, I said, hey, if I can't, I'm banging my head against the wall for 20 years. If I can't make that difference anymore, then it just became too tiresome for me, too weary. And I will say, a year to the day before I left, I said to my wife, I think I need to leave. And I always used to joke that I'm the only person who could get fired and come home and say, honey, I lost my job. And she'd say, great, now you go out and make some real money. But you know what? I shouldn't be surprised. She said, it's all you wanted to do. It's why you went to law school. Give it a year, because you think you're at the end of your rope, but there's always ups and downs. And there were some ups and downs previously, and I got through them. She said, give it a year. So I said, okay, I'll give it a year. And it was the most difficult year of my professional life, for sure, because I go to work naturally happy. I didn't find myself going to work happy. I found myself going to work, and it now was a job and it was a chore. And that doesn't serve the job. It doesn't serve the public. It doesn't serve victims in that regard. So I did try several cases that last year. They were cases that should have been won, and I did win them. But still, even doing my own self-analysis, I would think to myself, 2 years ago, would I have tried that differently? Would I have done something better? And I think we're all called to do that, to always do self-analysis. And I just felt like, you know what, if I'm not all in, because I only do something all one way, you're either all in or you're not. And I realized that I needed to leave. So, and it was difficult because I did not go to some big private firm. I didn't look for any of that things. I just thought, honestly, I'll tell you, I prayed about it as I do everything. I prayed for discernment so that, not for a result per se, because I don't think that's the way, at least the way I believe, I don't believe that's the way God works. God has his own plan. So I prayed for discernment as to what my path was. And my path was to kind of bet on myself, kind of go out into private practice with something of my own. I had a partner for the first year and a half, 2 years. Since then, it's just been Rossman Legal. I do have 2 other lawyers that work with me, but it's my firm, my name on it. And I have been blessed beyond anything I expected, to be honest with you. It was, so I have that. And then the question becomes, well, why do you want to give that up and go back? And then people say you're going backwards. And I don't see it as going backwards, because I'm not going back in the same capacity in which I previously served. I'm going back to, in an effort, hopefully, to make the agency more responsive internally so that it is more efficient for its purpose, serving the community externally. And that's very, very important to me. So that's really the driving factor to me. I want to make sure that, obviously I live in this county, and probably until I'm put in the ground, we'll be here. It's home. I've been blessed with a son and a daughter that, thank God, I'm born and raised here, and will probably live. My son now works over in Tampa. My daughter still lives here, but he talks about coming back. And like everybody else, everybody out there listening and watching your podcast, we all want some semblance of safety, some semblance of security. I want to know that there is a system that is not perfect, but should always strive to be perfect. As human beings, none of us are perfect. Every one of us is imperfect in ways that we'll strive, hopefully, if we're honest with ourselves, we'll strive to make better every day of our lives until the end. But I want to make the system strive to be perfect, even though it will fall short all the time. There will always be shortcomings in anything that human beings are involved in. But I want to take the experience that I had, not just as a prosecutor, meaning a litigator, a trial lawyer. People can Google and look up, you'll see the Sun Sentinel's written a bunch of articles about homicides that I tried, organized crime cases I tried, and things like that. And those things were very important individually, and the collateral damage that those cases cause. It's important that victims know someone's going to stand up for them in court. But that's not the sole goal of the state attorney's office. The state attorney's office is to make sure that hopefully the majority of people who never interact with the state attorney's office, the goal is for those people to know that it exists and that it will always function in a firm but fair manner for all people. Whether you're tall, short, white, black, male, female, gay, straight, none of those things matter, because ultimately everybody's heart is red. Last time I checked, there's no melatonin in your heart. It's not white, it's not black, it's not brown, it's not gay, it's not straight, it's not anything else. And I was raised, at least in a church, that a church is welcoming, and not that everybody has to be religious to be welcoming, but I think if we all are welcoming of people as we first meet them, we have a better chance of interacting with them and finding something in common, as opposed to defining ourselves by our differences. So I think with that goal in mind and an experience, I do think it matters. I think that somebody to run the state attorney's office, it's a huge undertaking. There's 200 plus lawyers, over 300 staff. We're talking about 500 people. In January, whoever takes over as the state attorney, and God willing, that will be me. But there's going to be tremendous cuts because of COVID-19 and the tax money that's not coming into the state of Florida. There's going to be budget cuts for every state agency, every county agency. Everybody's going to be having to try to do more with less. And I think that my experience in having been in that office for 20 years, and then being out for 6 years and managing my own business, and knowing that you need to treat people that work, and I say with me, not for me. I mean, I'm the sole owner of the business, but there's I call her a super staffer. Chelsea takes care of 3 lawyers and kind of runs the office. We have to work together, and we have to do more with less, because we don't have all the money in the world. And honestly, if we did, I wouldn't. It's not there to be wasted anyway. It's there to be put to good use. So I think that the experience I have, not just in being a prosecutor, but having worked in misdemeanor as a supervisor, having moved up to felony, and then being a supervisor in felony, and handling DUI manslaughter cases, which are some of the most painful cases in the 20 years I was there to deal with, and working in the career criminal unit and seeing the damage. The fact is, a very, very small group of people commit a very large number of the crimes in our community. And that's data driven, it's fact based. There's a very small group of people, and it's not driven by race, it's not driven by sex, but it is a small group of people that commit a large number of crimes. And the legislature, the state of Florida, decided, well, we're going to focus on them. And Broward County created 2 courts, 2 judges, career criminal, they call it Rock Court, repeat offender court. But you weren't just sent to that courtroom. You had to have a certain number of violent priors to be designated for that courtroom. And there were 4 prosecutors in that courtroom instead of 2 or 3 as in the regular felony courtrooms. And they were experienced prosecutors. And we were expected to pay attention to these cases, because if somebody has 9 prior robberies and now they commit a 10th, there's that I was in for 7.5 years, 85% of the victims were Black or brown. So there is a disparate impact of crime against people that are Black or brown or people of color. So, and it really is sadly economic based. It is a matter of people that are lower economic, in lower economic situations, that there's more crime in those neighborhoods. But I will tell you this, the moms and the dads that I spoke to, the grandmothers, the aunts and uncles that I spoke to, particularly in the homicide unit, they would come to me and say, we don't need less police, we need more. I mean, there's a homicide committed at 2 o'clock in the afternoon, broad daylight, right in the middle of the street, a stabbing up in an area called Carver Homes. I'm sure you all know where it is, just west of I-95. And I will tell you, I'm born and raised in North Day, but since high school, Broward County, I'd never been there, but I went. When I was assigned that case and I was going to prosecute that case, back then it was still the Pompano Police Department, it wasn't BSO. And I called and I said, I'm going to that neighborhood. I'm going to walk that neighborhood. You're going to show me where you found the knife. And the person that I called, the crime scene person, said, well, you need to have a unit go out there with us. And I said, I don't care what resources you need. I need to go and see the neighborhood. I need to see the people. I need to see, because I'm visual. And when witnesses come and talk to me about this house and that house and somebody walked, I need to see that. And boy, my eyes were opened, because it hurt my heart, partly because of my own ignorance. I stood there and I thought, this is not a shanty town outside Johannesburg. This is my backyard. This is my home. And the street that I was on, the homes were boarded up and closed, but there were people living there trying to make the best of what they could. And they said, hey, the police don't patrol in our neighborhood. And I talked to one of the officers and he said, we answer 911 calls here. And I said, well, that's just not good enough. But it gave me a great education. And knowing that, I will tell you now, having been a prosecutor since 1994, the people that are in command staffs of all the police departments, the municipal police departments in this county, I know them all. They know me. I'm a known entity to them. We've grown up together. The ones that I didn't know directly through my job as a prosecutor, I have met in my time in private practice. Most of my time, not the other 2 lawyers in my firm, most of my time is spent training and advising police departments. I have contracted with many of them. I've trained almost all of them. I've also put on seminars with 2 other people as well at the police academy. I've taught out at the Institute for Public Safety since 1997, because like my father, I needed a second job as a prosecutor. I started making $23,000 a year in 1994 with about $68,000 in student loans. So I'm proud to tell you those loans were paid off. We paid them off, and I can't say by myself because I'm married and we are a team. My wife is a teacher, a school teacher. She was home at a break for 5 years when the children were born, but she went right back to work when our daughter started pre-K 3. So collectively together, we were able to, you don't eat out every night. There's ways to do it. I mean, obviously, and you try to make as much money as you can in any way you can. So I taught at night. I would work all day, and then when there were legal sections to teach at night, I taught out there. So I know the other people that are invested in our community. There's great work being done in a lot of police departments. I know that may not be popular with a lot of people these days. I do think that they're like in everything. There's good and bad in everything. There are some people that should have never become police officers. And there are some that became police officers and did a really great job. And yet over time, based on the things that they have seen in their career as a police officer, they have worn down and they should no longer be a police officer. And we have to have some resources internally to identify who they are. Most agencies, here's the funny thing, most agencies, they know who they are. Most agencies, and honestly, some of the officers that I know, the officers themselves know. They know that they know. And I use myself as an example. When I felt that I was no longer 100% giving of myself, in the manner that I believed that I should in my job, I left. Now I will tell you, you can ask anybody, it's pension suicide, because my pension's worth next to nothing, what it would have been had I made the 30 years. But you can't, I've never made a decision based on finances. You can't make a decision on money. And I had to leave because I was no longer, I could not renew my spirit every day. I could not, recharge my batteries. It wasn't happening. And if that's the case, even though I was complimented very much for the work I did in that last year, I knew better. I knew that I needed, my batteries weren't recharging. So then I needed to remove myself, though I felt it was my calling. I felt it's why I went to law school. And now that's really why I'm going back now, because I do feel that it is a calling to make sure that the office has an experienced hand that can sit with those partners in law enforcement and say, listen, we all need to do better. I will promise you this, and I will promise anybody listening or watching, that once a month, I will meet with the chiefs of police and the sheriff. We will sit in a room together, a conference room. I've said this before, you could look it up. I'm not saying this for you guys. It's in one of the previous forums that I participated in. And I'm very disappointed that this did not happen previously with Mr. Satz. The Broward County Chiefs Police Association, they meet once a month. And oftentimes it involves command staff and things like that. And but that's separate. I go to those meetings every month. I see some of the great collaboration. One chief will come in and say, hey, we have this problem internally with an employee. You all should look out for that and add better training. There's really, really great collaboration that goes on there. But that collaboration never existed between the state attorney's office and those law enforcement entities. And I never understood it because I answered my phone. When I was a prosecutor, I got calls at 2 o'clock in the morning, answered my phone every time. I approved search warrants, arrest warrants. I also didn't approve search warrants that should not be approved. I didn't approve some arrest warrants that could not that they didn't have the right person, they didn't have the right facts. And just because you have the right person doesn't mean you have enough to go ahead and deprive me of my liberty or to come knock on my door and search through my personal belongings. You also have to have the right facts.
And speaking of search warrants, I didn't want to cut you off, but
Absolutely.
you were very involved in the search warrant that was signed to have the person that murdered our sister. I believe you okayed the search warrant. I mean,
Yes,
the arrest warrant, I believe it was.
Well, the
And
first one
you
was
were
a search
very
warrant.
involved in that. So just kind of tell the people your involvement in that.
Yes, sir. So the way it began, and I don't even want to give him fame, so I won't say the person's name, right? But
Don't say his name because I think it's very important that the people know him.
I will say his name, Gary Troutman. Mr. Troutman he committed I'm just going to say it the way it is. He committed 2 homicides in 1986 that we know of, both Cassandra Scott and Angela Savage. So somebody y'all are very, very dear to your sister. And he was prosecuted for the Cassandra Scott homicide. And sadly, the laws as they were on the books in the 1980s provided for, if you went to, this may not be a popular topic, but I can explain it. But when you were sentenced, he was sentenced to 40 years prison in 1994. And the minute he walked in the door, 1/3 of his sentence was eliminated. And every day that he was sitting there, another day was taken off. So there's no truth in sentencing. If he didn't deserve 40 years, then don't give him 40 years. But if 40 years is appropriate, then he serves 40 years. That was my take on it. So he was due to get out, and it was 2007. And excellent detective, Detective Frank Ilaraza with the Broward Sheriff's Office, had not they get assigned cases as they come in, as they happen. Sadly, we have homicides happening every week. But Frank also took the time to look at the cold cases, the cases that oftentimes are forgotten. And your sister's case was in the cold case category. And it was because also science was very limited at the time. We had some what we would call scientific evidence, trace evidence, blood and things like that, fluids. In the 1980s, there was nothing they could do with them. They couldn't test them. And even in the 90s, they tried to test them and the science wasn't good enough. Well, by 2007, the science was good enough. And Detective Ilaraza started hunting over the state attorney's office for someone to approve a search warrant. The search warrant was to go to the Department of Corrections where Mr. Troutman was being housed, though the day was coming, his day of freedom was coming. And before he could get out, to go and take a buccal swab of his mouth and get his DNA so that we could test his DNA against the evidence that your sister had helped in the struggle for her life, had helped collect and make sure that he left behind. And in fact, that DNA came back and registered to Mr. Troutman. And based on that, and some other evidence, obviously, but based on everything else we knew, and one of the other important things was the similarity between his crime and that with the crime against Angela and the crime against Cassandra, that I agreed to say, yes, let's, in fact, my recollection is the sheriff's office wrote a probable cause affidavit. We didn't even go to a judge to get with the classic arrest warrant. They put a probable cause affidavit on him in prison, just like they would have gone out on the street and arrested him, because they were worried that he was going to get out before we could get that done. Ultimately, we did get an arrest warrant in the system. Mr. Troutman was never released he was released from the Scott's case. His time on that ran, but he was released from the Department of Corrections and brought to the Broward County Jail to answer for the homicide involving Angela. And I was the assigned prosecutor on that case up until the day I left, I'll say sadly, September 30th of 2014. And there's part of it that haunts me to this day. All the cases were very, very personal to me. And if I can say this kind of as a privilege, your mother and father are the picture of grace. So if people don't know your mom and dad in the community, they ought to, because they are the picture of grace. When I moved into the homicide unit in May of 2007, in the next 6 months, I was assigned 13 new cases. And I don't know why they were assigned in that rapid fashion, because it's difficult to keep up and get those cases already. But I also inherited 12 cases that were already pending. I brought forth this case, the case we're talking about now against Mr. Troutman, and I brought forth a cold case out of Davie, which had 5 co-defendants that the crime was committed in 2005. I brought that case forward too. And defense attorneys would tell me in court, you know, you don't have any stress because you don't have a client. And now they're defending somebody, and I take no issue. We need good defense attorneys. If somebody charges me with a crime, I want somebody that is in my corner fighting for me tooth and nail. So that is very important. Our Constitution doesn't work without that. But
I think his internet connection may have went out. It's been going in and out.
Yeah.
There he comes back. There you go.
are we back?
Yes, I think your internet connection may have gone out on you.
Are we back? I'm sorry about that.
I can hear you.
It may be.
Wayne, are you texting him?
Look,
Yeah.
I could look kind of grainy on the screen here. So I'll blame Comcast for that. I apologize. But I was saying in court, I was constantly told, you work for the state, you represent.
Well, we apologize for the technical difficulties here. He's having some internet connection problems. That happens when you're on Zoom, so that is to be expected.
Of Broward County, but you know, to a victim's family, who's the person there standing at trying to get justice for them?
One second, so I closed this door, was brought back. He'd served his time on Cassandra Scott's case. Now he was going to have to answer for Angela's case. One of the complications with that, and one of the reasons that other prosecutors, I think, maybe shied away from the case, because a very, very important part of prosecuting that case was using the Cassandra Scott case and those facts in the case against Troutman for killing your sister, for killing Angela. That's a tall, tall order. The law typically is very, very limiting, and I understand why. The law is we don't want Greg Rossman prosecuted for hurting one person because we think he hurt someone else. We also have to make sure there's facts that show that I did exactly what you're being accused of me of doing. So I was accusing Mr. Troutman of murdering Angela. I first had to show facts that connected him. That, and the DNA was very important to that. Show that. And then his claim, in anticipation of his claim, trying to say well, he's knew each other, therefore the DNA doesn't mean anything bad. Doesn't mean he was there when she was murdered. But that's when the facts of the Cassandra Scott case became really important. And I filed what's called a Williams Rule motion, very, very complicated motion. And ultimately, we had made our way to Judge Alona Holmes, who did not let Mr. Troutman get away with the games. He'd been through 3 or 4 judges, been through 4 or 5 attorneys. One of his attorneys got off the case because he physically threatened her, and she came into court shaking, terrified, saying, I can't represent someone who's threatening me physically and my family. And that would always, every time we'd get ready for trial, he would fire his lawyer, and the judge would now have to have a whole nother delay, and we had to see whether he was competent to represent himself, because he kept saying he wanted to represent himself. And we get ready for trial, and he'd say, well, I don't want to represent myself, I want a lawyer. You have to appoint a lawyer. But thankfully, Judge Holmes has seen all those things previously as a trial judge and her previous experience. Ultimately, there was going to come a point in time where it was going to trial, whether he had a lawyer, didn't have a lawyer or such. Sadly, that time came after I had already left the office. And I will say my first concern was if a new young prosecutor took over. When I left, I was replaced by 2 people. I was told I had too many cases and they were too complicated for a new person. And honestly, I went and said, hey, I've been saying that for years. It's a burden for me too. But nonetheless, I was replaced by 2 people. But many of my cases had to be taken over by more experienced people. It wasn't because the people that followed me weren't honest, hardworking. They were 2 great people that replaced me. Didn't have the experience in homicide, though, handle some of these cases, such as the one we're talking about now. And my fear was, if a newer person got it, the case itself might be abandoned altogether. And I did not want that to happen. So the head of the unit, Mr. Kavanaugh, who I asked, please look after this case, was familiar with it because he had talked to him he'd given me great counsel on the case. And then come to find out that there were changes in the case law before going to trial. I know there was great concern that in trial, Judge Holmes might not be allowed, may not allow the Cassandra Scott evidence to come in. And if that happened, then it's a whole different set of facts. So So I know that ultimately, I think there's a result that that's not a result that you all are excited about. Certainly not one I'm excited about at all. My entire time there, they were begging for second-degree murder. He was charged. I guess people listening don't know he was charged with first-degree murder appropriately, and that's what he should have stood trial for, with first-degree murder. He was asking from the beginning second-degree murder. It wasn't dragged on so long. I wouldn't agree to second-degree murder, and there's two reasons why. One is second-degree murder didn't fit the crime. It wasn't second-degree murder, it was first-degree murder. Secondly, because he had killed Angela in 1986, the old law still applies. And I went to appellate lawyers in the state attorney's office. I spoke to somebody who worked in the attorney general's office that does appeals at the next level in the appellate courts. I said, somebody give me an assurance that if he gets second-degree murder, he gets 40 years or 30 years, he's going to serve day for day. Because then he's going to die in prison. And then I would say, all right, I'll swallow calling it second-degree murder, but the community's safe. Nobody could tell me that. But he said, no, we think it's 1986 law because that's when he committed the crime. I said, well, then 100 years doesn't mean 100 years. 50 years doesn't mean 50 years. There's no truth in sentencing. Nobody could tell me how long he's going to stay in. Unless I know how long he's going to stay in, he's going to have to beat me at trial. And it's not because I'm being cavalier about that. It's because I believed morally, first of all, in the case, and legally in the case. I believe that if I could get that case in front of a jury, the jury's going to understand exactly who he is, who he was, and he still is. And they're going to see him for what he is, and they're going to come back and they're going to convict him. They're going to convict him of first-degree murder. In that case, even in 1986 law, it was life in prison. So, so that was the desired result. You know, it doesn't always work out that way, and that's not the only case. Lots of other cases. You have to look at the big fear is if we go to trial and we lose, we get nothing. He walks out and gets in the elevator with all of us as we walk out the door. That's the only thing holding him. So there's definitely, I hate to use the term cost-benefit analysis. People call it that. That's a business term, and I hate that because we're talking about humanity. We're talking about human beings. Even him, he's a human being. He's got a family. We're talking about weighing. I always view people as, we'll say you have a case. Well, the case is against a person. And there are people, some people have done evil things, and they're going to be held accountable. I can assure going forward, again, God willing, I'm elected by the people of Broward County, the state attorney. People like that will be held accountable. There's no other way out. There's one way out. Yeah, that means if you think you have a better case, then you know what? I'm going to make sure that the prosecutors that work for me are properly trained, that they know exactly what it takes to go to trial in a case like that. We bring it to the people of Broward County because people of Broward County are smart and as far as sitting at jurors, and they'll figure it out, and we'll get a better result.
Well, absolutely, absolutely, and we wanted our viewers out there to know, you know, your involvement in our sister Angela Savage's murder case, and we do appreciate your effort on behalf of the family. We appreciate everything that you tried to do, and you know, while you were there in the prosecutor's office, even though it didn't happen the way that you wanted it to happen and the way we wanted it to happen, we give you an A for effort.
Well, I appreciate that, but I will tell you, when I think I was saying I got a bunch of cases assigned right away when I first moved into the unit. One of the members of the grand jury said to me, because first-degree murder can only be brought forth through the grand jury. I don't know if the people listening know that. I can't with my pen charge you. I can charge you a second-degree murder, raise my right hand and swear the evidence is there, and that on this day and this time that person committed second-degree murder. But first-degree murder, any capital offense, has to go through the grand jury process. So I was all these cases in a row, and the grand jury kept seeing me week after week. And in the grand jury, they see some horrific things, as you guys know. They see autopsy photos, crime scene photos, because they have to make a determination. Is there a probable cause to believe this person committed this crime against that person? And if so, is it first degree, second degree, is it manslaughter? Is it justifiable homicide? Is it excusable homicide? Let's consider all those things. After seeing me over and over again, one of the members of the grand jury said, how do you do this? Every day, this is your job. We come like every other Tuesday or Wednesday, and it affects our lives. And I told them, I said, you know, I have met some of the best people in my life for the worst of circumstances. I am friends to this day with many of the families that lost somebody in the most tragic, some of the most evil circumstances. It just, I don't know how, and I think it's because at the beginning when I sit down with the families, as I did with your mom and dad. I say, no one's going to try harder. Nobody's going to care more. I'm also never going to lie to you. So if there's something bad about the case that hurts the case, I'm going to tell you this is what it is. If we draw a judge that, and originally you draw a judge, some judges don't get to their cases in 4 or 5 years. That's another crime. That's a completely separate crime. That's a fixable crime. That's where the state attorney, having been the state attorney for 44 years now, there's no reason at all that the state attorney, Mr. Satz, can go to the chief judge, or quite honestly, I will go first to the individual judge and say, you're getting assigned cases randomly like every other judge. It takes us 5 years to get a homicide tried in your case when another judge has it tried in 2 years. Why is that? Why is that? You're getting assigned the same number of cases. You can't avoid them. At some point, I'm a believer, you first go person to person. If you're going to criticize somebody, you go talk to that person directly face to face. But if that person can't get their job done, everybody's got a boss. You go to the chief judge and say, listen, I know you can't fire them, but move them out of criminal. Or set some standard, set some metric. This is the voters should have a metric for me. If they vote me in 4 years from now, they may vote me out. If I'm not doing the job, they won't have to vote me out because I won't run again. If I have done the job and I have failed, I won't seek the job. I'm 55 years old. I don't plan to be in there 44 years. Everybody watching knows that. I hope to be able at some point to take vacations and have grandchildren. That's what I'm looking forward to.
Absolutely.
But for right now, I'm invested in this community. I think that the state attorney needs to get all the players together, sit down with the public defender and say, how do we make this system work more efficiently so that we can get more cases to resolution, the correct resolution. We won't always agree on what the resolution is. If we don't get to that point where it's trial or it's plea, then the cases drag on forever. And that the damage to your family, I'm not asking you to say that, but it's immeasurable. From 2007, that hope that you must have, hey, it's finally come forward. And month after month, subpoenas every 3 months, another subpoena 3 months later, hey, yeah, well, the case isn't going now, it's been postponed. And there's due process, and there should be. Defendants have rights, and they should be protected. Victims need a voice. You know, there's a private attorney or public defender should be sticking up, and they should be fighting for their defendants, for their clients. Who speaks for the victims?
It took 8 years to bring him to justice, and he just toyed with the justice system. And
you saw it even at sentencing. You saw what he thought of the system. There was no but that part I'm ashamed of. I'll tell you, when I was in the office, it's largely dependent upon the judge that gets the case. Now, in our case, I want to make sure everybody knows, it was not with Judge Holmes for 8 years. Judge Holmes at that time was kind of like the judge of last resort. When you played games with every other judge, ultimately the case aged, and once it was of a certain age, once it got to about 3 years, that case got transferred over. Now, it didn't get to her in within 3 years, but ultimately that case gets transferred to a judge that says, you're with me now, and you're not getting any other judge. And I don't know if you guys saw it. Sometimes I saw it. He was vile, said some horrible things to the judge because he thought that would get her off the case. She would get enraged, yell at him, and lose her objectivity, and she was better than that and said, no, I'm the judge. You're not getting me off because you played games enough. And then the games were with firing his lawyer and getting a new lawyer. That's controllable. I 100% believe that's controllable. And I will tell you that there will be metrics. We will see the age of cases. Cases will not sit because we will, if I need to come on the Adams Brothers podcast and say, listen, Judge so-and-so has cases that are 4, 5, and 6 years old and we can't move them, I'll ask to come on your show.
And we look forward to having you back here too.
And Greg, I want to ask you, how would you assess the performance of the outgoing state attorney, Michael Satz? How would you assess his performance?
I'll tell you, it's very uneven. Let me start by saying this. I will tell you, I know him. I worked for him for 20 years. So he is an honest, decent, good man. And I will never say otherwise. However, I will say I left at the 20-year mark. I mean, most people leave 4 or 5 years and they want to go out and make money. I was a lifer. I should have never left. When I left at 20 years, other people say, hey, that was like an earthquake in the office because everybody knew you were staying forever. I left because the state attorney, as he ran the office, in many ways, we ran the office in 1996, as we did in 86, as we did in 76. In 2006, it was the same. Personally, I believed that there ought to be metrics. I'm going back to 1999. I was a supervisor in the felony trial unit. I was in charge of 4 judges' divisions. One of the divisions had 4 prosecutors. The other had 3. So I had 9 and 4, 13 people that I was directly responsible for. And when I took that position, I met with the state attorney, Mr. Satz, and I said, Mike, when do I do evaluations of my people? Is it quarterly? Is it, every 6 months? When do I sit down? What are the metrics that I use to put into paper, thought to paper, say, are they doing a good job? Are they doing a great job? Are they doing a terrible job? And when do they evaluate me? Because, by the way, they should evaluate me too, just because I'm their supervisor. And we had this discussion, and he said, we don't do evaluations because they're too subjective. My response was, well, the military does it. Police departments do it. I wish I had known this. I was still a baby prosecutor at the time. We did have secretaries. Secretaries in the state, the staff, the state attorney's office had quarterly reviews. How are the lawyers not getting quarterly reviews? And I can tell you some things that are not subjective. Let me back up a second. What is subjective is, did they win a trial? That's a difficult thing, because I was kind of known as the prosecutor of last resort. I would go to trial on a case, one that we've talked about, the case we were just talking about, Mr. Troutman. I wasn't afraid to go forward on a case. If I lost honestly. Then you know what that means? That we didn't have enough. We weren't able to present enough to the members of Broward County, hold them accountable. I hold my head up because we did the right thing. And so in the office, other people would say, well, if I lose a case, I'm going to be looked at badly. So it's easy to plead the case out. You're not going to be criticized for losing a tough case. Well, that's subjective. What's not subjective is, number one, do you show up for work? I got to tell you, you guys look around, there are people that just didn't show up and had no consequences. Didn't come to work.
So Greg, do you think there needs to be a serious purge in the state attorney's office? If you're elected, would you do a full purge of that office and bring new faces and new ideas?
I'll go back to front. There's definitely gonna be new ideas. And there will be new faces. Now, when you say a purge, I'm not gonna use that word, because a purge to me, everybody goes. There's great people doing great work there. Right. At the top, there's going to be all new people. I mean, that's and I think they know that. I'll be honest with you, they're already kind of termed out. Some of them are there, back on contracts and things like that they should have already left and should have had to leave. So I don't think it's any shock, and I'm friendly with most of them. I respect them in great degree, but I told them, don't take that contract. Don't do that. You gotta. I will say this. I think Mr. Sachs did himself a disservice. There were some important people to him that he offered a contract with. Bring those people back. Had he looked at me, I think had he come on your podcast and said, "Here's what I'm doing." They've retired. They are supposed to separate from service. I've already said I'm not running again. They're the glue that holds the office together the way I run it. Someone else is going to take over in 8, 9, 10 months. So I'm going to hold the office together as I run it for that next person, because who wants to become the chief assistant, new chief assistant, then maybe you're out when the new person comes over. I could understand that. And I could wrap my head around that. If he told me that, and if he told you that, if he told the public that, I think people would say, I don't love it. There's a logic to it. And he didn't say that. He said that those people had to come back because they were so important to the Nicholas Cruz case. And listen, as you all know, when a prosecutor leaves an important case, it does get handled differently and not always in a better way. But nonetheless, that case was never going to be tried this year. Everybody knew that. So to me, it's just look me in the eye and give me solid reason for what you're going to do. If I disagree with you, I'm going to tell you that. I may respect the reason that you give me. So yeah, there's going to be entirely new team. I don't want young prosecutors in their first, second year watching your podcast and going, "Oh, Greg's coming," and everyone's going to be purged. The true fact is, every 4 years that I worked, I was sworn originally on the first day I worked. I got sworn in October 3rd, 1994. I had to take the oath again in 96, 2000, 2004, 2008, and 2012, because as Mr. Satz won office again, he had to be resworn as a constitutional officer, and we all had to be resworn. So in January, God willing, when I'm taking that oath, it's not whether you're firing people, it's who are you bringing back? Because everybody has to be evaluated. And there'll be a process between November and January where you're able to determine. I'm still very close to the office. I said, working with the police agencies, it's been interesting. I had my own criticism of the office when I worked there. And you can ask anybody internally. I was not shy. I spoke up, and they would come over and pat me in the head and say, go to court, win your cases, and stay out of our way. And so I did that until I could do it no longer. And now when I was out and I started serving these police agencies, now I'm looking back at the agency that I worked for. Now I see whole new criticisms. I see there was just a deafness to the needs of police agencies. Police agencies do a great job training their people how to drive a car, how to use the taser, how to shoot a gun, how to all the defensive tactic stuffs. And I'm not criticizing that. If my son was a police officer, I want to make sure he can defend himself. If my daughter was a police officer, I want to make sure she can defend herself. What they don't have enough training on is what are the limits of their authority. As a legal advisor, I put out a legal bulletin. Hey, a new law was passed. You can do A, B, and C, but you cannot do D, E, and F. You need to know that. And guess what? 15 years ago, you were allowed to do D, E, and F. So some of you older guys, make sure you read the new legal bulletin that went out because your authority ends here. Now, that's just the legal side of it. Then there's the mental health side of it. The humane side of it is I always struggled with younger prosecutors coming in saying, when I was a supervisor, I want to talk about this case. I'm like, it's not a case, it's a person. It might be a terrible person. It might be a good person, it'd be a terrible thing. It might be a good person who has some kind of addiction and brings them into the system. Let's always start with, it's a person. I will acknowledge sometimes that person is, in my words, unredeemable. But we still know that person has a mom, dad, grandmother, grandfather, son, a daughter, or whatever. People that love them, those people come to court and they sit right behind you in that pew. So never lose sight of the fact that what we're doing here affects people. So the same thing happens in police agencies. Like I talked about before, some officers become so traumatized by the job, they stop. And I know Black Lives Matter and people of color, to me, it goes beyond that. It's more dangerous than that. The minute I stop seeing you as a human being,
Yes.
Yeah, you seem like
you
you're
hear me,
back.
Wayne?
Yeah.
Okay, I'm sorry about that. I'll find somebody from Comcast and I'm gonna get some money back from them or something for my internet connection. But I don't know where I left off, but I hope you heard what I was saying that when I as a police officer or I as a prosecutor stop seeing you as a human being, I see you as a suspect, or in court I see you only as a defendant. That's an inanimate thing. That's not you're no longer a person. You're a thing. And that's what we have to protect against. We have to make sure that we're training police officers that hey, come on the job and know how to do your job, know what the law is, enforce the law, know where the law stops, make sure you don't go beyond the law. Also, make sure that you enforce that law humanely. Everybody they deal with is a human being. Every person they come in contact with is a divinely inspired human being, whether they are now a human being on a bad path or in a bad place. You still have to deal with them that way. And I've talked to officers saying, well, you haven't walked in my shoes. You know, my father did it for 36 years. Two of my brothers for 30 years. My uncle was with the Florida Highway Patrol for 33 years. Two of my cousins are with the sheriff's office now. I may not have walked in those shoes. When I grew up, I will tell you this, and this is very important. I want everybody to understand. When we hear at the protests, we hear say their names, and I take no issue with the litany of names. The list is too long. But I want to make sure that everybody understands. When I was 5-6 years old, I wanted my dad to come home. I didn't know what he was going to encounter out there as a police officer. Good people, bad people in bad situations. As a 5-year-old, my dad worked the midnight shift, and he would come home at 6 o'clock in the morning. I'd get up and go check. I'm one of those people that sleeps 4 or 5 hours a night. He'd work the afternoon shift to come home at midnight, I would get up and see he was home, and he'd say, "You don't need to get up." Like I needed to see. Looking back now, I see it. I didn't think of it that when you're 7, 8 years old, but I got up to see he was home. So they're human beings too. They want to make sure they come home from the shift as well. And you know what? 99% of them do the job with that kind of empathy and do it well. There is 1%, maybe it's 2%, whatever it is, that we need to identify them before they identify themselves to us. That's what I want everybody to understand.
Let me jump in here a second. While you're talking about police officers here, and we have police officers in our immediate family too. My son is a police officer. I have a cousin that's an assistant police chief with the state of Michigan, second in command, first cousins, lieutenants, sergeants, everything. So obviously our family, we support the police. But what's troubling Black America right now, me as a Black man, my brother, I'm
all
sure,
America,
all of us, is what's happening, how we're being shot down in the streets here. I could just read off some names here: Jacob Blake, George Floyd, we all know what happened to him, Breonna Taylor, Botham Jean, Ahmaud Arbery. These are people that's being shot down in the streets, and it's a big problem here. Some people, I mean, you see some of the comments they make on some of the news stations on Facebook, just comply and you won't get shot down, and they say some really nasty racial stuff. What are your thoughts
those
on
are keyboard cowards, I call them.
what are your thoughts on police shooting unarmed Black men across America?
Great question. I want to start with the last name that you read off, Ahmaud Arbery. Think of his scenario. I think he would have hugged a police officer if he saw one. Remember, Ahmaud Arbery was not shot and killed by a police officer.
Right.
He was shot by vigilantes, is the word I'll use, people that were taking the law into their own hands. If we defund the police, if I can tell you, I see it. When police officers are afraid to do their job, they pull back. The first people to suffer, people of color, because it's their neighborhoods that they get pulled back from. When crime goes up, it's happening in every city where we've had an instance like that. So what I was saying as we started this, those officers are identifiable before they identify themselves to us. And by that, I mean before they're involved in an instance like that. I will tell you, the one thing that I will not say is I will never act as the state attorney until we have all the facts. I am disturbed by the case in Atlanta that so quickly before there wasn't a statement taken or a police report written. And the DA up there, Howard, Mr. Howard, indicted the person. Well, he didn't indict him, but had him arrested, the officer. He may ultimately prove to be correct. My goodness. I mean, our job is to gather the facts first. And I don't want, whether you're a carpenter, a police officer, or a teacher, I don't want somebody come and arrest you until, as I said before, even if I know we got the right guy, we have to have the right facts. So me, and I'll use George Floyd, the other example. Me, the George Floyd instance brings up exactly what I'm talking about with that officer. And let me finish the statement, because people, when I say it, they get a funny look on their face. I don't see it as being racial. To me, it's worse than that. Going back to what I just said before. I think that officer didn't see George Floyd as a person, as a human being. Black, white, all short. I think that officer had been on that job so long, and he's been in that fight so long, that he put his knee where he put his knee because he was going to control, because he's dealing with a suspect. He's no longer dealing with a human being. And at that point, Mr. Floyd loses all his humanity underneath that Officer Chauvin's knee. For that, he must be held accountable. And I believe will be held accountable. So I believe that we can identify these officers, as I say, before they identify themselves. They identify themselves when we see this. Now, I will tell you, in the issue, the issue you mentioned about compliance, I will tell you this. I have a 26-year-old son. I was raised in a home by a police officer. My father gave me the same speech. My Black friends tell me that they're worried about giving their sons. My father told me, you start driving a vehicle, you're going to get pulled over. Eventually, it's going to happen. 16 years old, even the jalopy that I was driving, the 1979 Honda Accord 5-speed stick with 180,000 miles on it, he knew as a 16, 17-year-old, eventually, I'm going to I'm going to drive too fast, or I'm not going to stop at a stop sign completely. And both of those things happen, by the way. And I'm going to get pulled over. He told me when that happened, you put your hands on the steering wheel and you say, yes, ma'am, no, ma'am, yes, sir, no, sir. And he did use the word, you comply. No matter what happens, you comply. And he said, there's good and bad. And you may get an honest, good police officer. You may get one that is dirty, that then next thing you know says you committed some kind of crime. And he's like, there are laws for that, and let the system do its thing. I gave that same speech to my son and to my daughter. And I was a prosecutor here when they were younger. I said, no matter what happens, you have to believe the system works. And I think a lot of the distress we have right now is all parties. And this is not just civilians. Police officers have lost faith in the system. Civilians, the non-police, we've all lost. And that's why I think we need someone to stand up with some experience who's been there before that says, hey, listen, if you commit a horrific crime, I'm going to hold you accountable. I'm not going to apologize for it. I'm not going to lose sleep over it. I will pray for you, but that's different than saying I'm going to let you out to hurt somebody else. Those are different things. But if you're a police officer, you commit a crime, I'm going to hold you accountable. They've all heard it. I've taught in every class. And I tell them, if you commit a crime, you're not a police officer at that point. You now are somebody else who's committed a crime, and you are now a defendant, because I'm charging you with a crime. And I don't care that you may have worked 20 years as a police officer, whatever it is. You commit a crime. I have the evidence to prove it. You're being held accountable. And because being a police officer does not give you a get out of jail free card. This is being a pastor, a priest, a teacher. Don't give you a get out of jail free card. We're all held to that same standard. And I am absolutely not afraid of that at all. I think as long as we're transparent, as long as everybody knows these are my facts, this is the crime I'm alleging, this is the person I allege committed it, I have the facts to prove it, then you know what? That's exactly my job, to make sure that we have the right facts against the right person. So
let me interject in one time too.
Yes.
And I'm gonna go back in case you might not know all the facts. I mean, I don't know all the facts. I'm just going by what I read in the newspaper and public records that I did obtain from the case. Fort Lauderdale police officer Stephen Coherence, and if I remember right, he had 72 use of force complaints against him. And I listened to you say that, those officers are identified and people know who they are. In a case like that, and I mean, what part are the commanders missing to let a guy, and I'm not saying all 72 was his fault, use of force complaints was his fault, but if a guy gets 72 use of force complaints, I think a light should go off somewhere in someone's head that we need to look into this guy a little bit more. We just can't keep giving him a slap on the wrist. Those are the type of officers right there, that are slipping through the crack, that are causing all the good officers to take a bad rap for them.
Well, I will tell you, and you know this, the person who hates a bad cop the most is a good cop. And it's a fact, because it makes their job impossible, and it undercuts the entire mission of serving the community, specifically in reference to Officer Coherence. I don't know, I should say this first. I don't know him personally. I've never met him. Like you, I have read through some of the news reports and some of the records requests that were released. One thing I do want to correct, 72, they weren't use of force complaints. So what happens is Fort Lauderdale, like most of the agencies, almost every agency that I serve, anytime, Fort Lauderdale is particular about this. The agencies have different metrics they use. I talked about measuring metrics. Anytime a Fort Lauderdale officer unholsters his gun or her gun, they have to fill out a use of force form, whether they pointed it at somebody or not. So if I make a traffic stop and you are backup, you and Daryl are my backup, and you stay at the back of the car, but you both unholster your guns because you don't know who you're pulling over, or maybe they say there's a felony warrant, me as the driver, and I'm walking up carefully, both of you have to fill out a use of force form. So if you're working and you're doing your job, you're going to have a whole lot of those. That doesn't mean, and I'm not trying to excuse him at all because I don't know the facts. I will say this, I'm not going to comment on his case because I could be the state attorney that has to ultimately preside over that case, if I want to use that term. So I want to be very, very careful. I think ethically, in fairness to the case, let's put it that way. That includes in fairness to him and in fairness to the facts of the case and the victim. I think that we all need to be very, very careful, make sure that is adjudicated fairly. And I have no problem adjudicating the case fairly. So that is, and that's one of the things where I think the state attorney's office should be involved, sitting with the chiefs and saying, listen, there are metrics that are used to accredit police departments. The town of Davie Police Department is just got reaccredited, and they've been accredited 3 times in a row now. The town of, I believe it's the city of Margate, accredited by 2 different agencies. The city of Miramar, almost every municipality here is accredited. And that means that independent people from outside the state and inside the state, other places in the state, come and look at all their processes, their procedures, and say, hey, your use of force policy needs to be updated. You want to be accredited, you've got a use of force policy from 1968. It doesn't fly. You've got one from 1988 that doesn't fly. It's not up to date with you can't have people working under those rules. So I will tell you, Fort Lauderdale's policy required any time if I grabbed you, if I touched you, and whether you're hurt or not, if I touched you, that's a use of force. So any time that I went what's called a hands-on, or if I deployed a taser or whatever, all those, and I'll tell you this, I go back and forth on it. When I first heard about that, I said, that's a bad policy, because it's gonna end up, if I'm an officer makes arrest, I'm gonna have 100 of those use of force. Ultimately, I agree it's a good policy. We want transparency. If Wayne, you say, hey, Greg, you got 100, I can explain and say, look at 96 of them. 96 of them are just so my department knows I was back up to somebody, or I stood outside a house where there's a bank robbery. We're all standing outside. We got our guns up. We're all have to fill out the use of force form. As long as I can explain those, because if I don't fill the form out, and to me that's more dangerous. Wayne can't do a public records request and say, well, there's no complaints against Greg, because nobody of my buddies, none of us filled that form out. So I come down on the side of every time there should be a use of force. I would just want to make sure that if I'm a chief, if I were an officer, I want to make sure my chief looks at me fairly and says, Greg, there's 100 of them. We're going to sit down. What you're saying matters, and I think you're right on the point. Someone should be sitting down. Someone should be looking at the numbers, and someone should be saying, you're at 55, maybe, and it might be he does great work. He's in a very, very active area, makes a bunch of arrests, and if that's true, he's doing great work, I'm going to take him out of that area, and I'm now going to put him, whether it's a school resource officer, or I'm going to put him with the DUI unit or something like that. That's what we need. There needs to be some intelligence there to say, we need to move people around. My father, in his 30 years at Metro-Dade, said he never wanted any of his people to work more than 5 years in a particular unit. And particularly the vice unit, the guys who become undercover drug guys, say, well, it takes us 4 or 5 years to create undercover identity and be trusted in that community. But and now you're wasting my resources. And my father would say, I'd rather waste the resources than lose your soul. Because you do something for too long in the same way, you live in that lifestyle as an undercover that long, eventually at some point you lose perspective of right and wrong. You're always in that life. So I think some of our agencies do a good job of that. Some of the others, they don't internally do that internal look and say, how can we be better? I want to answer this one last thing before the next question. Going back to what I said, I remember if it got cut off when we lost the internet. I'm going to sit down with every chief and the sheriff once a month. It's going to be on my turf. I'm going to invite them. They're all going to come. I will tell you, they want to come. They want to get better. The first thing I'm going to say is, how is my agency failing? How do we get better? I'm going to sit down and I'm going to humbly listen. And however long it takes to go around the room, they're going to tell me what we're not doing well. Then it's my turn. And then I'm going to turn and say, Chief Williams, Miramar, this is what you got to do better. This is what we're seeing. The cases you're bringing us are not written properly. You're not getting statements. I'm going to say, right now it's Interim Chief Lynn at Davie. Chief Lynn, Davie's not getting us witness statements fast enough. So it takes us longer to file cases, and that delays the case, and that causes problems. And I think I know I can do that because there's trust. I'm not going to, no disrespect to you guys, I'm not going to call Adams Brothers, go on the podcast and say, I just embarrassed Chief Lynn and I embarrassed Chief. I mean, that's a private, trusted group. For me to be able to call out, but it starts with calling me out. What is my agency doing? And I can tell you, there are times when an officer works all night, midnights, and he's needed at 10 o'clock in the morning to testify, and he stays up and he gets child care and he makes a bunch of arrangements to get there. And the prosecutor says, oh, we pled that case out yesterday. They never give the courtesy of calling the officer's agency because they have a coordinator and say, hey, we don't need you. Don't come for that. And the prosecutors that I worked with, young prosecutors, I was a supervisor, I would hold them accountable for that. And they'd say, well, he's getting paid. I'm like, that's not your call. First of all, that costs the taxpayers money, by the way. So it doesn't matter whether he's getting paid or not. If you pled that case out, you have an obligation now to follow up and make everybody know this case is over. Civilians don't need to show up needlessly. Officers don't need to show up needlessly. The case is over and done with. So, but that comes from trust. I'm sitting in a room with a chief and saying, you tell me what I'm doing wrong. Tell me what I can do better. We may not always agree, but they may say, Greg, I want you to do something this way, or you're holding officers too high a standard. I'll say, okay, well, guess what? In 4 years, you can vote me out. That's the standard. But at least we have an honest dialogue. I can tell you, since they know me, they all know me. I'm a known quantity, every one of them, and they're known to me. So I can have that conversation. I will have that conversation once a month. And you know what? I'll be happy to come back on and tell you guys, if you say, hey, Greg, did you have a conversation this month? I will tell you, yes, we did. I may not tell you what we talked about because there has to be some trust that we can talk openly. And I will tell you, we had a great conversation and they criticized my office for A, B, and C. That I'll share. It's not my job to necessarily share what I criticize them for because I want them to get better. I think that's important. I think that's something unique that I can offer. And that's not just unique between myself and Mr. Pryor. That's unique between myself and all the candidates, including Ms. Murphy, who I have great respect for, was still in the office. We just think very differently. I will work with law enforcement. They are my partners. We need them. You and I, as citizens, need them to do their job well. We also, to do that, need to turn around and hold them accountable and say, do your job well. Do it right.
Let me ask you one other question too, Greg. Do you believe that marijuana arrests should be treated as civil citations?
I got to tell you, I'm a little troubled by that, and I'll tell you why. I think that we're moving towards Florida. I think we're moving towards legalizing marijuana. If once it's legal, then it's legal and the problem is solved. The issue I have with marijuana with the civil citations is when it was first implemented, there was no database. You say, well, what does that have to do with marijuana? Well, here's what happens. I get a civil citation in Lauderdale Lakes from the Broward Sheriff's Office. Nobody knows that. The next day I'm in Davie, I get a civil citation. There's nowhere way for them to look up that yesterday I got a civil citation from Lauderdale Lakes by BSO. I'm in Hollywood 2 days later. There was no repository. We sat, this came from one of the Broward County Chiefs Police Association meeting. They invited the clerk's office and said, come and tell us, because when it was first put out to the chiefs, they buy in. And that's kind of how it works. You got to say, listen, we have this new program. We need you guys to buy in. Because honestly, if the chiefs don't buy in, you can't make them do it, right? So you want them, you want their input, you want their honest input, and they weren't all against it. The question was, how many first chances does somebody get? Is it 8, 10? Is it 12? There was supposed to be a database created. It says when you get that civil citation, it's logged and it's registered. So now we know. And the problem is everybody wants to keep it out of what's called the FCIC, NCIC, which is criminal history. We don't want a young man or young woman to have a criminal history based on that interaction. So they created a new database because we couldn't use the one that already existed that does that well. And that officer has a mic on his shoulder or her shoulder, and they call it in, and dispatch says, yes, this person's had 4 or 5 before. It didn't exist, and it still doesn't. It's very, very flawed. So fundamentally, am I against the idea of civil citations? I think there's a place for civil citations. Very, very, and I will tell you this though, very specific crimes. I mean, I saw video of a terrible, terrible beating in a school. I reviewed on behalf of one of the agencies that I advise. The victim's mom had called. She said, my son was beaten severely at school. Your agency did nothing about it, never arrested the person. The agency said, she's right. We don't even have a case. It was because it was handled in school and the person was given a part of restorative justice and part of a promise program. We've never referred to the police. If we watch this video, I wish I could go back and get the video. Like the little boy was beaten by a much bigger boy, stomped, and everybody else had their cell phones out. They're sad. And you've probably seen videos like that on YouTube. All the other kids, instead of helping this poor kid who's getting beaten down, nobody deserves that. Even if he did something that offended the person, nobody deserves that. And then ultimately it was, well, the equivalent was, well, it's a civil citation. That's how we handle that. I got a problem with that. If that's going to happen, the victim's family, the victim's going to have some input. If we're talking about any crime, if people say, well, battery is not a crime of violence. If I walk up to you out of the blue and just punch you in the face and knock you down, it's a misdemeanor battery. You tell me it's not a crime of violence. Like, you know, you're getting up seeing stars. You may ultimately be fine and have no permanent damage. You're probably going to get up and give it back to me is what I'd expect. That's the way I was raised. But nonetheless, so I have issues. And before we go down that road, we want to come up with solutions. Well, the solutions have to be broad-based. We have to make sure the back end, we know what's happening. A way to keep track of that. Because otherwise what happens is I give you a civil citation, it never gets registered anywhere, you're never held accountable. At that point, you're almost emboldened to keep doing what you're doing. Here's my issue with marijuana. It's more dangerous than cigarettes. All my friends that freak out when they walk into a restaurant and somebody's smoking a cigarette out front, they get all offended. Say, I got to walk through that person's cigarette smoke and it's going to kill my lungs and they shouldn't smoke in front of the door. They should be down the road. Marijuana is going to, we're going to have the lung disease. We're going to have the throat disease. Everybody's forgetting to look at, we're trying to ban cigarettes, but now we're trying to encourage actually intentionally inhaling and keeping something that's even more toxic than a cigarette. So on a personal level, I have grave concerns about that. And that's what I told my children on a personal level. That there's damage to be done there. Be very, very careful. Now, I was raised that we are divinely inspired people, so we need to respect our bodies in all ways. I don't have anything against alcohol. Personally, I don't drink. I never acquired the taste, as my brothers tell me, it's an acquired taste for beer and such. I don't have issues with other people that do. But I just think that we got to be careful with what we take into our bodies. And it's kind of, I do have some concerns. Our attitudes towards marijuana have shifted so quickly, we haven't followed the science. Because there's science out there that the THC that's in marijuana today, 100 times greater than the THC that was in marijuana in 1968. It's a very, very different thing. So if we're going to legalize this thing, I hope to God first we look at science and we say, hey, what are the benefits? Because there are medical benefits to that. We see that. Those medical benefits come without that THC. Cannabinoid oils and such. I'll follow the science. I have no problem following the science. What I get nervous about is the politics jump ahead of the science. We should always follow science.
Let me ask you something too. President Trump called the Black Lives Matter organization a terrorist group, a terrorist organization. Do you believe that, and how do you feel about that?
I will tell you, I have grave concerns when I look at the website, when I look at the organizational structure, the things that are on the Black Lives Matter website. There are some position statements that I wholeheartedly disagree with, and they concern me. I will tell you that. That doesn't mean they're telling everybody to go out and burn and loot. Those are different things. The unrest that I see, I think it's been hijacked. The unrest that I see in Denver, I think has nothing to do with George Floyd. I think it has anything to do with advancing the cause of Black victims. I think right now there's unrest for a whole bunch of other reasons. I think COVID has a lot to do with it. I think people were locked down and locked up, all this pent up energy, and they don't have jobs. Normally, a lot of these people are going to work, and they don't have jobs. I fail to see it. It breaks my heart because I grew up in Miami-Dade County. I grew up, saw the riots in Overtown. My father worked with some of those riots in Overtown. And guess what always burns? Overtown burns. Liberty City burns. And they're set back 20 years. Somebody comes in and invests, and a very proud Black business gets opened, and 3 years later it burns. And now he wants to go to a bank, she or she goes to a bank to open their store again, don't get money. I don't see that. So I have concerns about the Black Lives Matter movement. My other concern is what I'm seeing now in some of the social settings, somebody coming up, and I'll be honest with you, the last video I saw, I didn't see a Black person involved. I saw a bunch of suburban white kids with masks on, went into a restaurant and demanding that this poor old lady raise her fist in solidarity with what they were telling her to do. That is terroristic. Don't get me wrong, I'm not saying that comes from Black Lives Matter movement per se, but there are people out there, and I say, in what country am I living? When a poor old lady is sitting there eating at a diner outside Washington, D.C., And who are these people? Where are their parents? These young kids that come and think that they're going to stand over somebody and say, think like we think or else. That's not America. Nothing. And right now we're in this, there's no dialogue in our country. Going back to what Daryl had said, I call them keyboard cowards because everybody's got these machines and they can say whatever they want to say. And now with a mob, they can go out and do what they think they can do, whatever they want to do. And I got to tell you, I am not okay with that. I mean, I think we need to break up the mob, hold the mob accountable, because I think they do a disservice to what we're trying to do is figure out how do we interact as human beings, police officers, civilians, black, white, gay, straight, all those things. How do we interact? And if we focus on how alike we are, as opposed to what our differences are, I think we get there. So, but look, I'm never dodging a question. So in answer to that question, there are things that concern me, absolutely. And I think we should all be concerned, honestly. I think a capitalist system, listen, I studied Martin Luther King. I went to Florida State, and we had 2 classes. One was communication. My degree was supposed to gear me towards law school, teach you how to communicate. I think my parents and God gave me that. You either have the ability or you don't. But nonetheless, you had to pick somebody that you were going to study for the entire semester, and you were supposed to. You could pick. Somebody pick like an advertising group by an airline and try what are they trying over 6 months? What are they trying to get you to buy? That kind of stuff. I picked Martin Luther King because I had heard of. I'm born in 1965. Obviously, I knew who Dr. King was. I didn't really know much about Dr. King. I read, starting with speeches that he gave at Ebenezer Church in Atlanta, his father's church. One of the first sermons he gave, he talks about there's 3 things that affect our lives, the 3 most prominent things. He says it is heredity, environment, and what we call personal responsibility. He said personal response. Your heredity is given to you by God. You're born to your parents. That is your heredity. Don't be ashamed of it. So if you're black, you're white, you're tall, you're short, that's your heredity. Don't be ashamed of it. You cannot change it. Your environment. You were born in Atlanta, Georgia. You're born in Zaire, or you're born in London. You didn't choose that. That's your environment. You cannot change that. The thing he preached was personal response. You can control how you respond to all those things. And Dr. King never ever once picked up a brick, rock, Molotov cocktail, never looted a store. And you want to talk about systemic racism? I hear that term, and I will tell you, it bothers me. It really bothers me right now, because systemic racism was, quote unquote, separate but equal. We're in a school that has no books and a teacher that's not being paid. I'm in a school that has nice new books, the teacher is being paid properly. That's considered equal. That's systemic racism, where the laws actually said you and I could not go to the same school. Systemic racism is you have to sit in the back of the bus as opposed to sit where anybody else is. That's a law that says you don't have the same dignity I have. That's systemic racism. Dr. King and the others that walked with him, Congressman Lewis, they had fire hoses turned on them. Fire hoses knocking them. The video's still out there. I wish these young millennials will go on YouTube and look it up. They had dogs let loose on them. Police dogs let loose on them. And what was their response? His response was, be better, police officer. Be better, firefighter. Be better, mayor. Better. He called the country to be better, to live up to the ideals that we have written in our Constitution. He didn't say rip up the Constitution, rip up our way of life and start over. Because there's a reason why people fight to get here. There's a reason why people get in an inner tube to come across the Florida Straits, get away from Cuba to get here. We're still the greatest country on the face of the earth. So I do think we're all called to be better. I think that just as I'm called to be better, my black friends and neighbors are called to be better. So are men and women called to be better. Every one of us is called to be better. It's how we answer that call. One of the things that bothers me, because, and I guess I should address this, I'm in Broward County. I'm a Republican. I know that's a terrible word. I'll address this to people on your podcast. So I registered as a Republican because I believe that the government's job is to protect us from bad people outside the country, bad people that are trying to hurt me inside my home. After that, we can figure the rest out ourselves. Let the local people do what they're going to do. Let us figure it out. That's why we're set up the way we're set up. We have a federal government, a state government, a local government. And that's why I identify as a Republican. The other reason I identify as a Republican is because as I was growing up and learning history, the Republican Party was founded on the abolition of slavery. 1858, the first Congress was abolish slavery. Abraham Lincoln did not appear on the ballot in the southern states because he was a Republican. He was going to abolish slavery. And from 1865 to 1876, after the Civil War, freed black slaves became congressmen, they became governors. They were all Republicans. In 1876, sadly, politics took over, and the Republicans in Congress said, we can't keep occupying the South. What happened? And this is what I say. I say, Republicans fought and won the war. Democrats stole the peace. I know my Democratic friends, you don't want to hear that. I need your votes. But look up history. Look up history. Every governor in Alabama, every governor in Arkansas, every governor in Mississippi throughout the 60s, every time Dr. King tried to bring somebody forward, every time they wanted to walk across the Edmund Pettus Bridge to Birmingham, there was a Democratic governor saying they're not going to, even though the law, Supreme Court had ruled the way they ruled, Eisenhower, Republican president, sent in the Army. Actually, to send in the Army and say, those kids are going to school at Little Rock, Arkansas. When I see that, I'm proud to say, hey, wait a minute. I just don't understand how my Republican friends don't get the message out. It also has to be in your heart. You know, it doesn't matter what Republicans did 100 years ago or Democrats did 100 years ago. What's in my heart today? What's in Wayne's heart today? What's in Daryl's heart today? So I hope people get that sense is when I'm elected as your state attorney, first and foremost, I ask people, vote your qualifications over your affiliation. But look at the qualifications. I've been a lawyer 26 years, 20 of those as a prosecutor. Mr. Pryor's been a lawyer 7 years. I've had 2 jobs, 20 years as a prosecutor, and then up there on my own and with a firm. I know Mr. Pryor's had 4 or 5 jobs. I don't begrudge that. I'm sure he's making decisions best for his family. I mean, if you're looking to hire somebody for a job, I do think that matters. I think it matters that somebody's got a long line of stability, and he may be, and everything I hear, I've only met Harold once at one of the debate in December before I was even in the race. Came up, was very kind to me, and everything I hear is that he's a very, very nice man, a very, very good man. I believe that. That doesn't make you qualified or unqualified per se for something. I just want people to look at the qualifications side by side. You make the decision that you believe his qualifications are equal or better mine, or there's something about him, whether it is his heart or whatever his message is, then you vote for him. I'm not asking you otherwise. Say, look at what I'm saying, size me up. You think I'm authentic or not? I will tell you this, I'm bad or ugly, I'm authentic. May not like some of what I have to say, and I'm okay with that. I just ask you, give me a look and give me a chance, because I do think it matters. I think it matters for our community to come together. We need to know that we have a safety net. We need to know that not only are we going to hold the officers and say, listen, you better believe in the system. We're asking you to help us run this system. If you can't run it, you don't believe in it, get out of it. You go do something else. Go teach, go coach baseball, or whatever it is, whatever skill you have, whatever gifts you have, share them in some other way. But they need to know too, we as a community, we understand their job. We're going to call them to do it better. And just as Dr. King went to Washington and said, you know, the Freedom March was exactly that. There were no riots along the way. I beg people to go look it up. And it wasn't just a summer of love, like a bunch of hippies showing up. They were determined people, mostly black, but there were white people there too along, because that's what Dr. King didn't say, I'm trying to make black people better. He said, the way I read it, when I looked at that whole semester that I studied, the way I saw it, he was saying, I want us all to be better. But it starts with those of you in power, which at the time were all white, saying, live up to your responsibilities. Live up to the words that you wrote. Words that we all live by, that contract, that all men are created equal. Yes, men, that includes women. At the time, it's just the way they spoke. All men are created equal. And if we believe that, or look at each other and talk to each other that way, we'll all be better for it. So that's where I'm coming from. That's really why I'm getting back in. It's why I'm going to give up a practice that, knock on wood, God, I shouldn't say knock on wood, but God has been very good to me. He's blessed me beyond anything. I have 2 beautiful children that if I accomplish nothing else in life and I died tomorrow, I'm blessed, and I lived a great life. I hope, like everybody says, like my grandmother says, everybody wants to go to heaven, but nobody wants to go tonight. I'm in that crew. I'm in that crew. I want to go to heaven. I want to go tonight. But if it happened, I have no complaints. I can't say anything bad.
Well,
it's been great having you on here. I mean, it's been a very enlightening conversation, Greg, and we appreciate you coming on the Adams Brothers podcast. It's good seeing you again, and this was just a great conversation. I mean, we didn't ask too much because we just let you just do all the talking, because that's what we want. Exactly how you are.
Listen, I got to tell you, when I started running for this, I don't get a lot of invitations. So I take my hat off to you guys. I appreciate being invited and being able to come on and express myself. And like I said, people make up their own mind, but you got to get your voice out there. And this is a wonderful way. I went and looked back at all the other people you had on, and it's amazing. So I really appreciate what you're doing. What you're doing is community service. And that's ultimately what you're doing is community service.
Absolutely. We talk to everybody. We talk to Democrats, Republicans,
Exactly.
Independents. We don't care
I saw it.
who it is. We want to know what you're going to do for the people here in Broward County. How are you going to best serve the people here in Broward County? That's what we're interested in. Yeah, we're not interested in if you're a Republican or a Democrat. We don't care about that. We want the best possible candidates to be representing us here in Broward County.
Well, I appreciate your, like I said, you're using your skills. You're serving your community using the skills you have. And that's what we're all called to do. So.
Absolutely. Well, we've been talking to Greg Rossman. Did I say it right that time, Rossman?
Yes, you did. Yes, sir.
Greg Rossman, he wants to be the next top cop, the next Broward County State Attorney, and he'll be on the ballot in November, on November the 3rd. And he's asking everybody to come out and go to the polls and vote for him. And Mr. Rossman, thank you so very much for stopping by the Adams Brothers podcast. It's been a pleasure talking to you. And when you win, don't be a stranger. Please come back and talk to us.
You invite me?
We're going to hold you to
invite
it.
me. I'll be there. You look, this is recorded. You can play it. You can say, he ain't no chicken. I won't be dodging you. So you invite me, I'll be there.
Well, thank you, sir.
We want you to come back.
Thank you, sir. And we appreciate your time, and have a wonderful evening.
You too. Great speaking to both of you again. And please give your mother and father a hug for me. Please.
Oh, believe me, they will be watching this.
They'll be watching
Good.
in about an hour. They're going to watch the whole thing.
Fantastic. You're blessed. Thank you.
Okay, you too. Have a good evening, sir.
All right. Bye.
Bye-bye.